For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served.
So now we know. Erin Patterson will be 82 before she gets out of jail, if she gets out at all. This will make her Victoria's longest-serving female inmate. But the revelations from Patterson's sentencing hearing in the Supreme Court of Victoria on Monday morning leaned less to the historic and more to the primal. Today, crime and justice reporter Erin Pearson on the people impacted by Patterson's premeditated and pitiless cruelty and what the judge made of them, and the unexpected moments of mercy and forgiveness that Patterson was nevertheless offered by one of them. Now, Erin, you were there in the Supreme Court of Victoria on Monday morning when Erin Patterson was sentenced. So tell us, how long is she going to be spending in prison, and what was the mood in the courtroom like?
She was given a life sentence by Judge Justice Christopher Beale, but he also did show her a little bit of mercy by offering her a non-parole period of 33 years. So by all calculations, it looks like she wouldn't be eligible for release from prison until she's about 82 years old.
And was that surprising to you at all that I guess he gave her that mercy? Because we know that the prosecutor, Jane Warren, had said that this was a case so cold, so horrific. Our submission is the offender is not deserving of mercy. So they were arguing that she should not get any parole. Now, we should state, her parole isn't for 33 years, and that's not guaranteed, right? She would have to apply for that.
That's correct.
So she very well might live the rest of her life in prison. But were you surprised that he even offered her the chance of parole?
I wasn't actually. This is a woman who, yes, she's killed 3 people and attempted to murder a 4th, but she had no prior convictions. She had no sort of prior interactions really with the justice system. And so going into it looking, from that side of things, it does make sense that somebody is offered a parole period. The reason why the judge said that, the main reason why he really decided that it was appropriate in this particular case was because of what he said was the really arduous circumstances that she currently has in custody. We know that she's housed in a really sort of high security part of the women's prison that she's in. And she's also largely been in solitary confinement for the last 15 months. She was in and out into a bit of a different management unit when she was first arrested, but she's pretty much been in solitary confinement now for such a long time. And Christopher Beale said that because of all the media reporting, that's likely to continue. She's likely to continue to be what's known as a notorious inmate.
I infer that given the unprecedented media coverage of your case and the books, documentaries and TV series about you, which are all in the pipeline, you are likely to remain a notorious prisoner for many years to come, and as such remain at significant risk from other prisoners.
And therefore need to be housed in a protection unit. So he took that into account in the reasons why he granted her parole.
And I'd love to hear from your perspective what were the most notable comments, I guess, that the justice made during his sentencing remarks. I certainly heard him refer to her, quote, pitiless behavior. So it sounded to me that he wasn't pulling any punches. But what was it like for you inside the courtroom?
Not at all. It was quite a bizarre experience in the courtroom today for a number of different reasons. One is, for the first time ever, the Supreme Court allowed TV cameras in to film him, the judge, while he was speaking. Now, the cameras weren't able to film anything else. They were focused directly on Christopher Beale, but it really changed the vibe in the courtroom. It sort of felt like we were in America, as we see with their justice system. So I guess initially walking in, the mood was a little bit different. In Court 4, in the Supreme Court in Melbourne as well, there's an overhead public gallery. So we had about 80 people, I think. I'm not great at counting, but I think it was about 80 people were shoulder to shoulder, packed to the rafters upstairs. Many of them were looking over the banisters, over the glass barrier, down into the courtroom below to watch the proceedings. And they started lining up from outside the court at quite an early hour. I mean, I arrived at court probably about shortly before 8 a.m. and the line was almost from the William Street entrance all the way down to Lonsdale Street. Such is the public interest in this case. Once we got into the courtroom, I guess the anticipation really was there for Erin Patterson's arrival. And when the tipstaff was heard on his radio saying that you can bring in the prisoner, everybody sort of started to go quiet. All the chattering and everything that was going on, the liveliness of that courtroom really changed. People were looking over to the victims' families who were seated on the far side of the room, and then in came Erin Patterson.
Well, tell me about that, because we know that for a lot of the months that she spent in the courtroom, she was often very, I guess, I don't want to say non-responsive, but very, very muted in her behavior. So what was her behavior like during the sentencing and in those moments when she was told what her fate was?
The layout of the room really, I think, impacted as well, perhaps her mood. She started off the first sort of 10 minutes or so of the sentencing looking straight ahead at Christopher Beale as he was reading out his sentencing remarks.
The jury necessarily found that you deliberately served poison meals to Gail and Don Patterson and Heather and Ian Wilkinson, and that you did so intending to kill them. Only Ian Wilkinson survived. The maximum penalty for murder is life imprisonment, and for attempted murder, 25 years imprisonment.
But after about 10 minutes, things really changed. She started to close her eyes, and her eyes then, for the next, what felt like almost an hour, remained closed. I only noticed her open them 2 or 3 times. At one point, when the judge was mentioning Ian Wilkinson's offer of forgiveness, and another one when he mentioned that she will remain a notorious prisoner because of the media reporting. At that point, she opened her eyes and she stared straight at the media pack, including myself, who was sitting just across from her.
And I'd read in one report that she glared at people in the media, including yourself. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very, very much so. And it was the same look that we got from Erin Patterson during the trial, when we would turn our heads many, many times during the day to try and see her reaction, to try and get a bit of an understanding, maybe what was going through her mind, what she was or wasn't reacting to. We get that same sort of scowl, that same sort of cold snake eye look from her. And that's exactly what we got again today. There was absolutely no emotion shown, no tears, very, very different than what we did see at the plea hearing, when she did appear to be distressed at one point. But no, she really sat with her eyes closed, almost in a bit of a, I felt it was a bit rude to the judge to sit there with your eyes closed while he was looking at her the whole time. But yeah, it was only those little short moments that we got a little bit of an insight into potentially what was going through her mind today.
And then in stark contrast to her behavior, I think it's fair to say that Ian Wilkinson, who was the sole survivor of the poisoning, he, of course, was in court, and he was a lot more emotional. So tell me about his demeanor and I guess what he said. You know, did it give us any more insight into what we previously had about the impact of these crimes on him and his family?
Now, we know Ian Wilkinson is a pastor, and yes, he is the one surviving lunch guest, but there's something quite powerful about being in his presence. He's an incredibly stoic man. This is a man who is still dealing with the ongoing effects of a lunch that really nearly took his life. And like he did at Morwell, he sat in court today with his arms folded, staring straight ahead, incredibly composed, surrounded by his adult children who he was there supporting and them supporting him. Right nearby him as well, we also saw many, many members of the Patterson family seated nearby. Simon Patterson was not there, and that was quite obvious, I should say, that he was absent from today's hearing. But for the first time ever, we also saw Ian Wilkinson address the press. After the sentence was handed down, he bravely stood on the steps of the courthouse and read out a statement. And that statement was very different from what we heard in the courtroom discussed about who Erin Patterson is as a person. Ian Wilkinson stood there and spoke of kindness.
I'd like to encourage all those involved to keep turning up and serving others. Our lives and the life of our community depends on the kindness of others. I'd like to encourage everybody to be kind to each other.
He thanked the members of the homicide squad. He thanked the members of the OPP. He thanked the members of his community, strangers who had prayed for him and offered him support, and asked everybody who was listening to his speech to go about their lives with kindness. And it was a really, really poignant moment where he stood there with dozens and dozens, probably close to 100, I reckon, members of the press, cameras, microphones, all in his face on what must have been a really, really difficult day for him.
It certainly was humbling. I mean, he was speaking of gratitude, really. I think there was such a focus on the gratitude that he had. And I loved it when he said, the court processes are a little bewildering to lay people like me, and we're grateful to their work and perseverance that has secured this conviction. I know that moment really stood out for me. But I wanted to take you back to what he said about forgiveness, and also within the courtroom, and also just what he said of his late wife of 44 years.
Yeah, so in the plea hearing that we had a couple of weeks ago, he stood in front of Justice Christopher Beale and read out one of the most powerful and heartbreaking victim impact statements I think I've ever heard anybody read out. Now, these are incredibly distressing at times, things to listen to. It's somebody's first opportunity often to stand up and address the judge and explain just what a crime has done to them. And we know in Ian's situation it's quite unique. Not only did he lose his wife and his wife's sister, but he almost, and his friend Don, he almost lost his own life. So he spoke not only on behalf of his experience, but he really paid homage to his wife Heather, who they'd spent so many years together. He painted a picture of just what she was like pottering around at home, and how they enjoyed gardening together, and how she was really just that local volunteer who cared for everyone. And there wasn't a dry eye in that courtroom on that day. That was something I think that will stay with everybody who listened to that during that time. And today he came back, though, very composed, and you could sense he was there to seeking justice for those that no longer have a voice. When Christopher Beale was summing up his sentencing today and the reasons why he's handed the sentence to Erin Patterson that he has, that was one of the reasons. He went and summed up those victim impact statements. He went back to them and pulled out some really powerful lines, not only from Ian Wilkinson, but also from some of the adult Patterson children and their experiences. Ruth Dubois, who's Ian's daughter, she spoke in the most eloquent way during the victim impact statements, and that was something that was really noted by His Honour as well. She also expressed a lot of anger towards her mother's killer for what had gone on, for this sort of senseless tragedy that really didn't need to happen. And lastly, she really pointed out all the different moments in the aftermath of the lunch when Erin Patterson could have changed potentially the fate of her victims, and told medical staff what had actually gone on and what she had fed her lunch guests.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because I know that she said in her impact statement there were multiple times she could have stopped, could have cancelled the plans, helped medical staff, changed the outcome. Instead, at every stop of the way, she chose to follow through. So was that one of the through lines in court on Monday morning, really the cruelty, like the excessive cruelty of Erin Patterson's actions?
Yeah, His Honour really focused on that as well. He said that he believed that Erin Patterson's murderous intent did continue during that time.
After learning from Simon on Sunday the 30th of July 23 that some or all of your lunch guests had been hospitalised, you showed no pity for your victims. Instead of informing those treating the Pattersons and Wilkinsons that you had used foraged mushrooms, which you could have done without having to admit that you had deliberately poisoned their meals, you repeatedly denied foraging.
There was all these different, potential times. We don't know if they would have survived if they got the antidote for death cap mushroom poisoning earlier. You can never really predict what would have happened, but perhaps they would have had that opportunity days earlier to access that particular antidote. So that they were some of the moments that His Honour was really reflecting on as well, those different opportunities she had to potentially change what happened.
And I wanted to ask you about the other victims, because I believe there was 28 victims who prepared victim impact statements for the judge. So was there any other ones that really stood out to you? And also, was it a surprise that Simon Patterson wasn't there today?
Yeah, look, he only attended court during the pre-trial and then the day that he gave evidence. It did feel like a very important person was missing from that courtroom. This is somebody who's lost his parents, he's lost his aunt, but he's also nearly lost his own life as well. We know now, while Erin Patterson is no longer being charged or prosecuted for these particular allegations, there were allegations made that she tried to kill him for a number of years in the lead up to the lunch. So he seems to be a pretty significant figure in all of this horror and all of this tragedy. But yes, we heard a number of victim impact statements read out from members of the Patterson and Wilkinson families, but a vast majority of them were handed up for the judge to read in private. There was others that spoke just of all the questions, that the unanswered questions that remain. We don't know what the motive was. His Honour today noted that the prosecution were unable to lay out what a motive would be, but essentially we don't need one to prove murder in the state of Victoria. So unanswered questions, forgiveness and confusion really seem to be some of the elements that came out in those victim impact statements at the plea hearing.
And certainly the suffering, I guess, that continues to radiate from these crimes. Because one
Yeah.
thing I thought was interesting was that Simon Patterson did write a statement in which he said that, he's still enduring trauma, which is understandable because, of course, not only has this crime occurred and his children have lost their grandparents, but he said that strangers had menaced his home and ambushed him at his door and in the street. Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, he was quite scathing of a small handful of members of the media that had, he says, gone well and truly above and beyond what is reasonable in trying to seek out comment from him. That was something that he said had been incredibly troubling and concerning to him. He also spoke about having to have a secret code word, almost with his children, that if they're in a cafe and they feel like there's someone with a camera coming up to them, he can say it to try and get them out safely and quickly without having his young children being confronted by this. The media clearly have a story to tell. We clearly have information to share. But I don't think anybody would disagree with Simon's sentiment that that is way too far and very invasive to his life. He's now a single father trying to raise two children, and that was the message he really wanted to get across.
And was there anything else that you learned during the sentencing that you didn't already know? That, I know that we don't know the motive and that, like you say, one isn't needed to make a finding of murder in the state of Victoria. But is there anything else you discovered that maybe either gave an insight into what was happening with Erin Patterson, or whether it's, the suffering that has resulted that we didn't know previously? Like, what else did you learn that was sort of really notable?
I think it was the absence of that. That was the most notable. Normally, when you get to this point, once a jury returns a guilty verdict or a person pleads guilty to a significant offence such as murder, usually a defence team will tender psychological statements. They'll tender supporting statements from friends or family, or there'll be lots of material that gives the judge an insight into who a person is, largely for the first time. And sometimes we get a little bit of information about that from a plea hearing. But even His Honour noted today that we really don't know that much about her past, and there wasn't a lot that he could talk about. Often those sorts of statements from, medical statements and alike are used as what are called mitigating factors and can be used to reduce a person's sentence. It's her choice. Ultimately, it's her choice of whether or not she wants to put forward those sorts of statements, if she wants to sit down with medical staff, if she wants to reach out to people to write statements. This is all her decision, and for whatever reason, she's decided not to, and she's instructed her defence team not to. Maybe there's a strategy in that. Who knows? We do know that she has said for a while now that she plans to appeal. She maintains her innocence and maintains this whole tragedy was just one big mistake. But what the defence team really largely relied on in their case in order to try and gain a parole period for Erin Patterson was her conditions in custody. We know she's being housed in this, as I said earlier, a really high security unit where she's lucky to get out of her cell even once a day. She has to be followed everywhere she goes. Her food and medication is brought to the flap in her cell door. She's not allowed to go and get it herself. These are the conditions that she's in. That was what the defence team really relied on to try and convince His Honour to show their clients a mercy.
Well, Erin, just to wrap up, so what is next? Because you've just mentioned, of course, she's got the opportunity to appeal. I believe her legal team has 28 days. So on what grounds could she appeal? And are we anticipating that she will?
Yeah, so there's a number of different avenues you can go down. A person can say that they have an unsafe guilty verdict for whatever reason, they didn't get a fair trial. There was something that happened during the trial that means that she should get a retrial, or she should have her conviction quashed altogether. She can also say that the sentence is manifestly too much and they need the sentence to be reduced. So there's a number of different avenues a person can go down. Exactly what Erin Patterson is going to do next, we don't know. We often see appeals lodged at the 11th hour, once they've got those 28 days. So we may not hear anything else, any other movement on this case now for a number of weeks. But if we do hear anything, we will be sure to let the public know about what the next steps are for Erin Patterson.
Well, we know it's been an incredibly busy day for you already. So thank you so much, Erin, for your time.
No worries. Thank you.